So welcome to the AND report. This is the 7th AND report covering the activities in AI and robotics from Saturday, February 7th through Friday 13th, unlucky 13th, but a good week for many companies. The pace of technology continues to progress very quickly with no sign of a slowing down. I heard some positive news on US-China relationships, but not at the government level, but within the tech community. And I have a new focus on robotics, and Anthropic had another great week. So I'm coming to you from a new place for the holiday weekend, so I'll get right into the news. Let's start with Moltbots. We talked about that last week. So I'd like to talk about Moltbots, or one type of autonomous AI agents. We looked at it where there was a number of, they started off as clawbots, became known as Molties. Now there's about 1.5 million of them floating around. And past week, they looked to hire a human CEO. You can find the job description on the Molties platforms. So if you go to Moltbook, you go to hire a human, or you just do a search for CEO for clawbots, you'll find the job description and the job title. The idea here is that the CEO is not meant to manage the Molties, but essentially to be a PR, public relations person for the Molties with the human community. I believe they're paying over $1 million in Bitcoin. I think it's 1.3 million in Bitcoin. So it's a good job if you're looking to work with autonomous AI agents. Also, there was a new development where another home hobbyist created Clawbot Cash as a way for Molties to open bank accounts. So as we saw, they were self-organizing and they were talking, and then we heard about Harry Human, and they've got banking built in. And Coinbase has launched an agentic wallets infrastructure designed explicitly for the clawbots or Molties to spend, earn, and trade autonomously. So as we're seeing, we've got this whole new virtual community, which essentially is all these Moltbots where they're working autonomously, repeating myself, hiring humans, opening bank accounts, looking for a CEO. Who would have thought this earlier this year? There's a prediction from the creator of Moltbook, that these AI autonomous agents, would be the largest population on the internet, and he's urging developers to build for them rather than humans. There was also an interesting picture on Instagram of, if you like, a home-built data center with a lot of Mac Minis. It reminds me of the Bitcom infrastructure that people were doing for bit mining. And somebody in China now has an OpenClaw community that he's managing in his infrastructure, and these maybe 1,000 Mac Minis. And they're working for him as 24/7 employees. So a synthetic workforce in the closet. So in summary, home hobbyists, techies, have created a new virtual world, one exclusively inhabited by autonomous AI agents, self-organizing and managed, multiplying rapidly, who can hire humans and have their own economy and banking system. As we'll see later in this report with robots, this new AI population might surpass human population in the years ahead. The next story is about Claude, Anthropic. They announced in co-work plugins just slightly before the beginning of last week, but they hit the news last week, where there was a stock market crash in legal products and services, finance, software as a services, and with investors who panicked as the capabilities now available with plugins questioned the need for these products and services. So these Claude plugins, which you can use on Claude or you can use on co-work, which I'm working with at the moment, allow you to create your own specialists. So legal services, your own legal team, your own finance department, your own marketing department, product development department, as well as increasing your own productivity and having a personal assistant. I decided, just on a related note, because of all of this progress in the last 2 weeks, literally in the last 2 weeks, I've decided to discontinue the weekly Zoom sessions I was hosting, partly because I was building these GPTs every month and giving them away to people so they could learn about AI and the infrastructure and the tools. But frankly, it's changing so quickly. Every time I put out a GPT, a few weeks later, it's going to be out of date. So what I plan to do is just continue with these reports and periodic Zoom sessions for deep dives into particular topics. Another Anthropic story was their chief product officer confirms that effectively 100% of Anthropic's product code is now written by Claude. We were discussing how coding is getting obsolete. In fact, I saw an interview with Dario Amodi from Anthropic last night, and he was talking that essentially all of the coding done in Claude now is done by agents and by the LLM itself, and coders aren't really needed. Giving equal time for OpenAI. OpenAI has reduced its model cycle time from 97 to 25 days at 3x acceleration and cadence. And people are predicting that in the future we'll have every day there'll be a new version of these LLMs. Just for reference, I think Anthropic were doing a release with their Claude Opus, Opus 4, Opus 4 up to 4.6 is the latest one, about every 75 days. But OpenAI are down now to 29 days, and we may see a future where it'll be done sort of real time. Also, OpenAI announced a delay in the Johnny Ive device that we talked about. It was this new tool that essentially is going to be a voice interface to the OpenAI platform, plus other things probably which haven't been announced yet. But the delay follows a trademark infringement lawsuit from Google and earpiece startup IYO, and OpenAI has now confirmed that it won't use the name IO for any hardware products. The screenless pocket-sized device is reportedly codenamed Dime or Sweet Pea, and OpenAI has not yet created any packaging or marketing material for it. So right now it's expected not this year, but in February of next year. The main topic of the report this week is about robots. I caught a very interesting interview with Brett Adcock, who is the founder of Figure AI, a robotics company. And I'll just go through some of the highlights in a conversation I watched where he was talking with the accelerationists, the people I follow heavily, Peter Diamandis, and some of his moonshot mates. So he was discussing the progress as well as some of the history with what they call Helix, which is their advanced AI model. So think about the robot having a brain, and the brain is AI. And then Figure, which is their name for their robotic humanoids and the hardware. So I'll go through the AI, some of the AI progress, and we'll talk a little bit about the hardware. But some of the main points in the advancement of their Helix AI model. Initially it was built in C++, but they moved over to neural nets, and it was a significant inflection point for them. Initially, Figure 1 robot used neural nets for tasks like putting a Keurig cup in a coffee maker, which is a big deal at the time. And that success led to them to decide go all in on neural nets for their entire software stack. Some of the main reasons they moved away from C++ were some limitations with C++ code in terms of handling complex and diverse behaviors needed for humanoid robots, as well as the cost and complexity of C++. They had several 100,000 lines of C++ code, which is very expensive to write and very hard to test and get out reliably. Whereas the advantages with neural nets, one is full autonomy. The transition to neural nets, particularly with Helix 2, which is the second generation of their AI brain for their robots, enabled full autonomy for the robot, allowing it to perform tasks like cleaning dishes without being pre-programmed. So just like we see AI automation with Clawbots, autonomous agents, we're now starting to see autonomous behavior in robots because of progress with AI. And in the case of Figure, their own product called Helix. Also, one of the things they've developed in their second generation brain, let's just call it a brain, is generalization and adaptation. So neural nets allow the robot to generalize to unseen places and perform long horizon work, meaning it can adapt to new environments and tasks. I'll talk about this in a second, a little more about how long they've been able to run these robots. Also, you get with neural nets full body control. So with their figure robots gain full body control, including coordination of eyes, hands, feet, and legs, all driven by sensor data and neural net inferences. So that's the AI model inferring based on signals from these visual cues they're getting from eyes, hands, and feet and legs. They actually have cameras in the fingertips and camera in the palm of the hand. Also with neural net, they're finding faster development. So they're getting to do retraining and adaptation more quickly. And it's a completely different paradigm for development versus the rigidity of C++ code. In terms of the architecture of their AI, they spent over a year refactoring the Helix architecture to enable full body neural net control, moving from good tabletop manipulation to dynamic movement and planning through a scene. Helix 2 specifically removed the remaining 109,000 lines of C++ code, making the entire system neural net based. The robot hardware, which their current model is Figure 3, was even designed specifically to run Helix neural net. So there's actually a link if you go on to Figure's website. Very simply, it's figure.ai. You'll see they have a video of their new Figure 3 robot running the Helix 2 brain. So you'll get to see this completely autonomous robot, no interaction from humans, not tethered to anything, learning a scene and actually doing work. When Brett was asked how autonomous the robots can be, he said they have seen them run for 2 days. Specifically, one experiment they did, the robot running Helix 2, again, which is the AI brain, ran for 67 consecutive hours and they had it in multiple robots in recent tests. And it demonstrated its high speed and accuracy in tasks like packaging logistics. So you can see in industrial settings, you're going to have these robots who can operate very quickly. They don't need to be programmed. So if there's a disruption in, let's say, the conveyor belt or whatever the manufacturing system is, they can react because they can think, they can observe, then they can adjust. And just to say, not many robots are like this. Most robotic manufacturers control their robots are controlled by humans remotely, often via the internet or virtual reality, for tasks requiring human intelligence in dangerous and distance environments. So key examples of robots that aren't fully autonomous yet would include Tesla's Optimus, which is using teleoperations for interactive tasks. You can program them to do some tasks like you saw at Elon's last general meeting for Tesla. He had the dancing Optimus, but that would have been programmed. But to get them to do interactive tasks, they're teleoperated by humans. And so many of and I'll talk about Chinese robotics in a second, but most robot companies, with the exception of Figure, have to talk or give guidance to the robot. But Figure has made a breakthrough with their Helix AI brain, where now you have autonomous capability. So again, just to say that as we looked with Molties or Clawbots, how they've been able to create their own infrastructure, their banking systems, they're hiring humans. Just wait until these robots have brains just like the Molties, and the robots are coordinating together, what that impact might be in the physical world. Just to talk about the Chinese robots competition for a while, Brett, the founder of Figure, thinks competition is good for the industry. He noted, however, that they almost have no supply chain in China anymore. In other words, as they're building their Figure robots, they're essentially not importing from China, going back to some of the Trump tariff wars. But he doesn't see anyone else beside China as a real competitive threat today for humanoid robots. So essentially it's China and the US trying to build at scale humanoid robots, both for industrial work as well as domestic work, consumer work. What he did say about China, and he's talking now about the engineers, is that there's an explosion of really great talent and robots coming out the door with great entrepreneurial work ethics. He said they also have a huge lack of closed-loop AI control for their Chinese systems, indicating they rely, as we looked earlier, on teleprompting or hand controllers. So you have somebody managing the robot. And they haven't really broke through in terms of autonomous robots yet. He went on to say that he spends a decent amount in China and thinks China is great, quoting Brett. He expresses his admiration for the spirit of collaboration among Chinese engineers. And this is what I thought was interesting in terms of Chinese-American relationships at the technical engineering level. He stated that everyone is on Team Human, Team Humanity to go win. He believes this collaborative approach is a giant lever for the humanity to bring about abundance and create the science fiction future we all want to live in. Now, I'm not saying we all want to live in the same science fiction future, but what I thought was really interesting that when you get tech people together, it's not about the governments, it's not about the politics, it's just about engineers creating great products. And so Brett clearly sees that China's doing great work. And it was encouraging to hear him say that the Chinese engineers were thinking about humanity, not so much their employer or the government of China. So plans for the future for Figure AI. He thinks robots can become very similar to humans. And he refers to his robots, Figure robots, as humans in a bodysuit. So I think when he feels like he's finally achieved his goal, you're going to have the singularity effect where you'll have a humanoid robot that looks human and behaves exactly like a human. His goal is to build general purpose machines that can learn across a variety of tasks. His plans include common sense reasoning, robots that can be talked to and process common sense reasoning, general purpose, designed to be capable of adapting to various tasks and environments based on real-world models, and I'll talk about real-world models more next week. Learning and adaptation. These robots can learn from a variety of rich data, which will help them become smarter and better. He talks about solving general robotics, creating a robot that can go into unseen places and do useful work. In other words, full autonomy for the robot. Personalization. He believes that people will form a strong bond with their personal robots, similar to how they view their cell phones. He even ponders if users would prefer the newer, latest robot models to their old one with accumulated scratches and personalities. What he's talking about here is as new models come in, humans may develop an attachment to their existing robot, even if it's scratched up, but because they're so used to talking to it and working with it. Two more points he had. One was ubiquitous presence. Humanoids will dominate the plurality of all robots, becoming ubiquitous across the planet. Here he's making a distinction between robots, arms, and devices we see in Amazon warehouses or in car manufacturing. What he's basically saying is that the plurality of all robots will be humanoid robots. The future impact, he says, will be for every human to have a humanoid robot to do all their work, leading to an age of abundance with ubiquitous goods and services. This is his vision. And I mentioned, look at the Figure AI website, and you'll see an example of their latest model running autonomously. For reference, there are over 1,000 robotic companies in China and over 100 in the US. It's expected in the next few years this number will shrink dramatically. The price for these humanoids is expected to range between $10,000 and $30,000 for your own to bring home. And some will be available later this year, particularly from 3 companies have announced that you can buy their robots later this year. One is Figure, who we've been talking about. There's another company called 1X who's got an interesting robot called Neo. You could check them out at 1X. And then Tesla, even though Elon's kind of running from behind a little bit, he's anticipating to get his Optimus robots into the home later this year. So if you'd like to be the first user, put away some money, 10 to 30,000, and you can have a robot in your house for Christmas. I predict, just like the electric vehicle market, the EV market, even though these Chinese companies are still not fully autonomous, as we've seen with cars, I expect these companies to have cheaper and possibly more capable humanoids in the market, if not this year, maybe next year. Certainly, I would say 27 going to 2028 will be kind of the year where robots become very familiar to people. You'll see them in hotels, you'll see them driving Amazon delivery trucks, and you'll have your friends talking about their the favorite thing that the robot does in their house. All of these companies have planned to build millions of humanoid robots in the next 2 to 3 years. And there's a view in the future, not too distant future, that there'll be more humanoid robots walking around on the planet than humans. And there's 8 billion of us, so I'm not saying there'll be 8 billion humanoids in the next few years, but certainly people talk about 2035 as being the singularity. So at some point in the not too distant future, you're going to see an enormous number of robots around. So after watching this interview, my perspective on where I pay attention has shifted. I had been looking sort of equally on AI developments and robotic developments. But for right now, I do believe that all the action and the impact is going to be with robots first. So what I think LLMs in the race to ASI are important. I think the impacts of those developments, like solving math, engineering breakthroughs, and medical breakthroughs, automating all work, I think they're going to take longer to implement. It could be 3, 5, 10 years. However, these robots are coming off the line later this year, and you're going to keep seeing more of them come every year. So I now have decided, these are my 2 main arguments for why I think a focus on robotics, and particularly when you think about AI as the brain of robotics. I think there's 2 key reasons why the focus should be on robotics for people watching the future. One is progress towards ASI will be implemented in the brains of humanoid robots. So in other words, as Opus 4.6 becomes Opus 6.4, it's now solving the world, you'll have that kind of capability also in the robot. It's not like the robots are going to be static with the latest version of the AI in their brains. They'll be constantly updated with the latest capabilities that AI can produce. That's my first reason for why I think robots are more interesting to follow. And the second thing, which people may not think so much about, which is unlike a human, where when we learn new knowledge, we know that knowledge. And unless we share it with other people, it's unique to us. However, with robots, because they're all essentially in an ecosystem from a company, whether it's Figure or 1X or Tesla or one of the Chinese companies, their brains are interconnected. So as any one robot learns something, all of the robots in that ecosystem of that companies will have the updates. So a simple example would be, and this I find amazingly interesting to consider, the example I would use is 5 people for Christmas get an Optimus robot, or they get a Figure robot. One's in France, one's in Botswana, one's in North America, one's in Brazil, and one's in Indonesia. So you got 5 different languages, and everybody opens their robot on day 1, and the robot integrates into the life of that family. And so in every country, they're speaking different languages. So on day 2, if you're in North America and you were speaking English to your robot on day 1, on day 2, that robot is going to know 5 languages, because all of that information is going to be replicated across the robots. And now you think about, as you work with your robot and they're learning new skills, all of those skills are going to go to the other robots in that ecosystem. So my view is that when you think about the future, and we're kind of here right now, I keep saying the future is here, I think that you're going to see more of an impact in the robotics world first before you see the big impact through the impacts of AI in other fields. Just because it takes longer to implement things that impact work, for example, or impact medicine, or if there's a new insight into physics, you have a new drug, pharmaceutical solution that hadn't been considered before. All of these things take time to implement, whereas these robots are just going to keep getting smarter and smarter and more numerous. And so I think that's the place to pay attention to. And in robotics, I include not just humanoids, but any autonomous systems. So, for example, fully self-driving cars, automation of manufacturing, and medical services. So I was curious to see if robots are kind of the first big disruptor. Just some numbers. There are well over 100 million professional drivers worldwide. There's over 540 million people in manufacturing. There's more than 250 to 270 million construction workers worldwide. And there's an estimated 1.1 million specialist surgeons worldwide. Now, I know that many surgeons would say robots won't take my job, but we already have robotic surgery. Actually, for a number of years, we've had remote surgery, but it's been teleoperated. So in other words, a surgeon in London, for example, will work on eye surgery on a patient in the Shetland Islands off Scotland. But we're now moving to a future of autonomous agents. So some surgeons, maybe for simple procedures, will lose their work. So I would say the impact to jobs, you will see, and we'll talk about this in a second, the workforce changes, but you will see an impact in physical human work, and I think it's going to happen sooner than people expect. Talking about workforce, Reid Hoffman, who you may know, board member previously at Microsoft and founder of LinkedIn, he was interviewed recently, I should say last week, and he was asked questions about, there were numbers, the Labour Department stats for January 2026 said that job cuts were the highest since 2009, as well as the lowest hiring on record. So Reid was asked about that, and his view was that it's not all due to AI. It's worth noting that 50% of the job cuts were three companies, Amazon, UPS, and Dow Chemicals. So when Reid was asked, do you think AI is responsible, his view was not yet. He's talked in his interview, he said he talked to a number of CEOs and that they have not specifically said AI was the reason. So there's no evidence for it. However, he does think that in the future there'll be a different story. So what are the explanations then for these low numbers? So his view was that unwinding after COVID, less need for entry-level people, turbulent times for companies, and what he articulated was the Trump tariff roller coaster. He mentioned that in some of the people he's talked to, he's heard that some are looking to sell their US businesses due to the continuing uncertainty of the economic and political climate in the US. When he was asked who in 2026 is most at risk, he quickly identified customer service in large companies. But he thinks that'll happen in their offshore centers first. He also, which I thought was interesting when you think about the three companies, Amazon, UPS, and Chemicals, he mentioned that most companies tend to do layoffs in a season, which you refer to as the layoff season, because it doesn't look as bad if you're the only company doing layoffs. He did summarize what he calls the AI explanation for layoffs. Companies can appear strong as they lay off people because they are adapting to AI, even if they are not, or if they're not yet successful with AI. So if you hear companies saying it's because of AI, what he mentioned actually was that there are some companies are laying off groups of people, but telling the remaining people, now you have to use AI in order for the company to thrive or survive. And so he finished by saying that his categorical advice to anybody is that all the businesses want to use AI, so you need to learn it now. So whether you're currently working or you're a student thinking about college, students have an advantage insofar as they can pass themselves off as native AI. But regardless of whether you're looking for a job or you're in a job, if you're not actually using AI, learning AI right now, you're going to be in the layoff community. One final thought, and I don't like to be political, but repeating what Reid said, he has some concerns about the direction of the company, as you heard earlier. He wrote a letter, an open letter, last week to the heads of all the tech companies, asking them to speak up. And he said that now is the time to speak up, as the US appears to be moving towards more of a fascist regime. And he mentioned that it takes courage to do so. And what I thought was curious, after I had heard this interview, some of my news sources, the new chair of the US Federal Trade Commission, who was appointed by Trump recently, has written a letter to Tim Cook at Apple, asking him to review Apple News terms and services and curation, and they're alleging that Apple is too left-wing in its news reporting. And in something that should concern all of us, we talked about dystopian societies where people are being surveillanced by the government or by companies. Meta, when they launched their sunglasses as Christmas gifts, their Ray-Bans, explicitly took out facial recognition. But now Zuckerberg wants to put it back in. So I see those two things in parallel with what Reid talked about. I do believe everybody needs to speak up. If you're concerned at all about the direction of the AI industry, of some of these companies, as well as any trends you see in the government, now's the time to speak up. And I gave you all sites on the newsletter. You can see these sites for safety. If you're concerned about the safety of any of this, I mentioned the Center for Humane Technology, Law Zero, the Center for AI Safety, and AI Safely Global Society. Any of these you can join or follow them to see what issues they're looking to get your support for. So just lastly to say, I retired the weekly Zoom sessions, as I mentioned earlier. So hopefully you can follow these news reports on my YouTube channel. I have them on my coaching site, and I have them on Spotify. So make sure you like and follow them on those channels. You can find me on LinkedIn at Pat O'Connell, the Connell Coaching Services Company. And certainly I hope you won't miss any future updates. So thank you for listening, and look out for next week's report, which will come out as an email next Friday and come out as a video for YouTube, Spotify on Monday. Have a great week.